Whether in London or in Poitiers, Eleanor of Aquitaine's court was the most brilliant in Europe. She was always surrounded by literate and articulate nobility, by poets and artists, and by the more radical and provocative kind of university graduates. She welcomed lords and ladies of great wealth and bold lives, poets and brilliant young clergymen thirsting with ambition and love of both the earthly and heavenly variety. The landed wealth of Eleanor's family, the ducal house of Aquitaine, lay especially in Bordeaux and Gascony, with its incomparable vineyards and access to the Western Sea. But in Poitiers was a memory, a tradition, an aristocratic elegance, and a very old Latin culture that made Eleanor feel confident and relaxed, secure in her lineage, gender, and sensibility. Our story takes place on a sunny day, a familiar palace in the background, the deep green color of spacious lawns, an exquisitely prepared picnic lunch, and the finest red vintages from her ancestral vineyards near Bordeaux, and the banter and wit of superior young people. This was the best that medieval society had to offer, in Eleanor's view. Queen Eleanor was giving interviews to a few selected petitioners for her favor. These petitioners were the unusual group of young men, university graduates looking for governmental or clerical posts that would produce a steady income and plenty of leisure time to write poetry and philosophy. There was a young woman of middle class, like Marie de France, hoping to latch onto a position in Eleanor's court and escape for a few years an arranged marriage with a boring, undereducated country squire, and the endless lottery of childbearing that almost inevitably followed, as often as not, to an early grave. And then there were middle-aged writers who had suffered a reversal of fortune and were very short of money, like John of Salisbury, the well-known English cleric, humanist and writer who suddenly turned up at Eleanor of Aquitaine's court on that day in September 1169. The Queen addressed him.
So, John of Salisbury, why are you here petitioning for a job? That is why you have sought an interview with me, I'm told.
Your Majesty, you have supported many writers and artists. I was hoping you could find something for me to do. Perhaps I could write a history of your illustrious house of Aquitaine, an account of the exploits of your grandfather, the famous poet Duke, and other chivalric ancestors of yours. Perhaps I can write your biography. All over Christendom, people want to read about the glorious Eleanor of Aquitaine.
Do I look that old, Master John, that I should set about commissioning my biography? I suppose when having reached my 47th year and having produced a brood of children and seeing lines appear on my face and streaks of grey in my hair, people expect me to die soon, and that I should start thinking about finding a biographer. The king does not lie with me anymore, as everyone here knows. He is too busy with his concubines and mistresses. But that doesn't mean I am in my dotage. I expect to be around for a long time yet. But perhaps a famous writer like yourself can write a suitable life up to now. Tell me, John of Salisbury, what are your qualifications to be a writer of my biography?
I have written some works of philosophy, an account of life in the papal curia, and most recently a political treatise. There is no subject on which I cannot write in elegant Latin, whether in poetry or prose.
Tell me, John of Salisbury, the story of my life, and I will see if you know enough about me and are sympathetic and insightful enough to be my biographer.
Eleanor of Aquitaine was the granddaughter of the troubadour Duke of Aquitaine, William IX, who was also famed as a crusader against the Muslims. Her parents died young, leaving Eleanor as her grandfather's heiress to the vast, rich duchy of Aquitaine. Just before he died, a few years later, Duke William designated Eleanor to be the ward of the French King of Paris, Louis the Fat. Following the advice of his chief minister, Abbot Suger of St. Denis, where Suger created the first Gothic-styled church, Louis VI married Eleanor to his own son, who became Louis VII. Eleanor and Louis were both very young and very much in love with each other. By Louis VII, Eleanor had 2 daughters. Louis felt compelled to answer the call of Bernard of Clairvaux to join the Second Crusade. While in the Middle East, the love between Louis and Eleanor cooled. On Louis and Eleanor's way back from the disastrous crusade, the Pope tried to reconcile the young, beautiful couple, tucking them in bed together. After Eleanor returned to Paris, she sued for divorce on the grounds that she and Louis were within the prohibited 7 degrees of consanguinity. Their blood ties were too close to conform to canon law. The Pope reluctantly granted the divorce. As the greatest heiress in Europe and most beautiful, Eleanor was pursued by suitors all the way from Paris to Poitiers. She gave her hand to Count Henry of Anjou, the prospective King of England, and 2 years later they were crowned King and Queen of England. They had many children, and they collaborated in affairs of state, with Henry taking the leadership in carrying out great reforms in the common law of England. Eleanor and Henry were also renowned as patrons of literature and the arts, and their court was the most chivalric and artistic in Europe. In 1168, Henry asked Eleanor to return for a while to her homeland in Aquitaine and to set up her glorious court in Poitiers, the better to ensure the loyalty of the people in the duchy to the Angevin imperial crown. That is my narrative. Your Majesty.
Oh, yes, the glory of it all. You have highlighted it. I give you credit, John of Salisbury, for doing that. Now, I would ask my court poetess, Marie de France, who amuses and intrigues us with her stories of romantic love and her social fables, to comment on your biography of Queen Eleanor. What do you think, Marie? Shall I hire John as my biographer?
John did not know what to expect. He had never read any of Marie de France's poems, and he was not even sure he had previously been aware of her existence. It was a new experience for John to have his writing judged by a woman. He was not sure whether Queen Eleanor really put stock in Mary's opinion, or if this was just a joke that the Queen was playing on him.
As for your account of Queen Eleanor's life, it gets a superficial story more or less right, but it doesn't deal with the realities underlying the surface story. This is masculine history that you write, John. It is written strictly from a man's point of view. It is history written by the powerful, the winners, by the dominant gender in society. History written from a woman's point of view is different. Even the story of Eleanor of Aquitaine. You make it all seem glorious because she was the daughter of the great lord, the wife of two kings in succession, one of France and one of England, and she's the mother of sons who will be kings. Eleanor has lived a life in the midst of the greatest wealth and the highest power. But what about her feelings as a daughter, a wife, and mother? How has she felt about her relationship to her famous grandfather, her two husbands, her sons? Has her life always been one of happiness? In the midst of palaces, can a woman not be unhappy? Can she not endure meanness and oppression, even cruelty? Has Eleanor been happy in love? Has she been able to follow her heart's desire? Or has she been a victim of the political system and hierarchical order? This is completely missing from your account. You have given us a pageant of royalty with everyone dressed up in fancy costume. But you have not given us a narrative of love and hate, a story of feelings and passions. It is the glory of it all.
John saw that Queen Eleanor was taking in every word and nodding her assent. He was devastated.
Undoubtedly, you wanted to flatter the Queen, so you were reticent about anything in her life that wasn't simply glorious. But I feel, John, you do not understand the new perceptions that are circulating among women of the European aristocracy today, especially in their relationships with men. This kind of sensibility is getting into the narrative love poems, the romances that I write. Some of the aristocratic nuns in northern France and western Germany have been involved in this new women's culture. I think particularly of Abbess Hildegard of Bingen. Yours is an all-male culture in which women are merely fixtures, and even a queen is an exalted figure without feelings. So I don't think you are the right one to write Queen Eleanor's life. Not unless you want the standard, conventional kind of masculine narrative, which is merely court propaganda. How are we supposed to tolerate biography that never presents a life from a woman's perspective?
Men raise everything to the level of philosophy. All differences in feeling they want to turn into big, rational arguments. Thereby, once again, they exhibit their propensity to dominate. What I know are particular things, not philosophical principles. What I know are the painful experiences of my life that John of Salisbury has omitted from his version of my biography.
Until now, Eleanor had been sitting in a throne-like chair that had been placed for her. Now she rose from the chair and stood in her regal splendor. She was still a handsome woman. All eyes were fixed upon the great queen. Many childbirths had ruined her figure, but her face was still one of the glories of Christendom.
When I was 15, I found myself heiress of a great duchy, but with no means to govern it and control the rapacious nobility who hemmed me in. I was afraid to step out of the palace. Then King Louis the Fat became my guardian, and I found myself carted off to Paris, where everyone in the French court made fun of my political inexperience, my southern dialect, and my brightly colored clothes. I was married off, without as much as a by your leave, to the heir of the French throne. For a little while, I had happiness. Louis VII was my age, and we delighted to explore the joys of sexuality together. Then, that dreadful creature, windbag and charlatan mystic, and universal busybody Bernard of Clairvaux, turned up at the royal court and tried to turn my husband into a pious monk. Louis and I stopped sleeping together. The abominable Bernard closed up my womb, and then he convinced my silly husband to go on a crusade. My husband, who was no military leader and was a physical coward. So off we went to the Middle East, where Louis lost an army and was lucky the Arabs didn't take his life. But while there, I learned again what physical pleasure meant when I slept with my uncle Raymond of Antioch. That ruined my marriage, of course, and I had to get a divorce. Finally, after 3 years, the divorce papers came through from Rome. I got on a horse and rode to Poitiers, pursued by half the horny barons of France who wanted to rape me and get my body and my land.
For shame, said Marie de France in mock horror.
Secretly, I sent a message to Henry, Count of Anjou, a 17-year-old stud, 11 years my junior, whom I had met only on a couple of times, that I would marry him if he would come and rescue me. And he did. Oh, he did. It isn't true. that I married Henry because he was going to be King of England. When I married Henry Plantagenet, he was still only Count of a small principality, without even a good vintage wine, and was only a claimant to the English throne. After our marriage, with the great resources and prestige of the Duchy of Aquitaine behind him, his prospects for the English throne improved immensely. And 3 years later, he became king in London. I chose Henry because he was handsome and sexy. I fell in love with him at first sight, and he didn't disappoint me. He was even better than Raymond of Antioch. I didn't know there could be such pleasure. For a few years I was very happy. But Henry kept me pregnant all the time. In 14 years of marriage, I went through 8 pregnancies, and my flowers wilted very late. I had my last child at the age of 44. I began to decline under these multiple childbirths, and Henry found lovers, most of them women, to keep him occupied during my pregnancies. For a few years I had a say in the government. But last year, Henry sent me away to Poitiers, ostensibly to secure the duchy, but actually to get me out of his way, so he could get on with his amour. I, a dried-up woman of 47, no longer interested him. That, John of Salisbury, is my true history. Would you care to write it?
Eleanor sat down on her chair and looked around, smiling. She was very pleased with herself. John of Salisbury was dumbstruck. He had a sense of vertigo, not from the actual events recited, for Eleanor was known by church writers as foul-mouthed and promiscuous woman, but from hearing these things from the Queen of England herself and wondering how he should respond, if at all.
Your Majesty, Marie de France is right. I would judge from your autobiographical account that I am not the person to write your life. I could handle scandals in the Roman Curia as I did in my papal history. But the inner life of the English court, that is beyond my humble talent.
In 1173, Eleanor of Aquitaine, with support of 3 of her young sons, rose in rebellion against her husband, apparently with the intention of regaining the independence of the Duchy of Aquitaine. Henry II easily put down the rebellion. Eleanor was brought back to England and kept in comfortable but strict confinement until Henry died in 1189. Eleanor died in 1194 during the reign of her son, Richard the Lion-Hearted.